December 18th, 1944. Camp Concordia, Louisiana. The mess hall smelled of coffee and something frying in grease. Steam fogged the windows while ceiling fans pushed warm air in lazy circles overhead. Outside, Spanish moss hung from trees like gray ghosts in the fading light. Greta Hoffman sat at a long wooden table, staring at her dinner tray. Real meat, boiled potatoes, carrots that still had color, bread, actual wheat bread, with a square of butter melting into the crust. Across from her, Frau Kessler cut her meat with precise, angry movements. She was older, maybe 50, with steel-gray hair pulled back so tight it seemed to hurt. She'd been a party official's wife in Hamburg before the collapse, before capture, before this. "They're fattening us for something," Kessler said quietly in German, not looking up. "This comfort is the trap. Tomorrow or next week, the real treatment begins." Greta said nothing. She'd heard this before. Every meal the same warning. But 3 months had passed since she'd arrived at Camp Concordia. 3 months of clean beds and hot showers and food that didn't taste like sawdust. 3 months of waiting for the cruelty that never came. At the next table, an American guard, Sergeant Rodriguez, laughed at something another guard said. Just laughed. Easy and genuine, like this was a normal Tuesday and not the aftermath of global war. Greta felt something shift inside her, something dangerous. "What if—" she started, then stopped. Kessler's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "What? What if this is just how they are?" The words hung in the air between them. 4 other women at the table had gone quiet, all eyes suddenly on Greta. Kessler set down her fork very slowly. When she spoke, her voice was cold enough to frost the windows. "Careful, Hoffman. That kind of thinking makes you a traitor." That word, traitor, would follow Greta through the next 4 months of her captivity, would split the barracks into factions, would force her to choose between the comfortable lie she'd been raised on and the dangerous truth she was living. This is the story of what happened when one German woman POW stopped accepting the propaganda and discovered that the hardest battle wasn't with the guards outside the wire. It was with the enemy inside her own barracks. Greta's journey to America had begun 6 weeks earlier on a cold October morning near Aachen. She'd been a communications clerk with an administrative unit, decoding messages and filing reports in a concrete bunker that smelled of cigarette smoke and desperation. When the American artillery started, she'd barely had time to grab her coat before the soldiers burst through the door, rifles raised, shouting in English she couldn't understand. She remembered the freckled face of the young soldier who'd taken her prisoner. Couldn't have been more than 19. He'd looked terrified, like he'd expected her to pull a weapon from thin air. "Du kommst mit," he'd said in terrible German. "You're coming with us." That was supposed to be the beginning of her nightmare. Nazi propaganda had been clear. Americans were brutal, especially to women. Capture meant degradation, starvation, perhaps worse. But on the transport ship crossing the Atlantic, they'd been given real soap, clean towels, 3 meals a day that exceeded anything she'd eaten in the last 2 years of the war. The ship had docked in New York on a November morning. Through the porthole, Greta had seen the city rising from the harbor, glass and steel towers climbing toward the sky, bigger than anything she'd imagined. No bomb craters, no burned-out buildings, just a city, functioning, alive. The train journey to Louisiana took 4 days. Greta pressed her face against the window and watched America unspool like a film reel. Farmland, cities, mountains, desert. The sheer size of it made her chest ache with a confusion she couldn't name. Her seatmate, a quiet woman named Anna, who'd been a nurse in Normandy, whispered, "How can they have all this? How did we ever think we could win?" Greta had no answer. Camp Concordia sat in northern Louisiana, surrounded by pine forests and fields of cotton that stretched to the horizon. The air was thick with humidity, even in November, nothing like the cold clarity of German winters. The women's compound occupied the western section, 12 wooden barracks arranged in neat rows, a mess hall, a small recreation building, all surrounded by barbed wire that glinted in the sun. Greta was assigned to Barrack 7, Bunk 14, near the window. Her bunkmate was Lisa Becker, 23, who'd operated radio equipment in Belgium before capture. She had a quick smile and nervous hands that never stopped moving. "I keep waiting for it to get worse," Lisa whispered their first night, lying in the darkness. "For them to show their true faces." Through the window, Greta could see the guard tower. An American soldier stood there, silhouetted, against the stars, smoking a cigarette. He looked bored. The next morning brought their first full day of routine. Roll call at 6 a.m., breakfast at 6:30, work assignments at 7. Greta was assigned to the camp laundry, a large building filled with industrial washing machines and drying lines, hot as an oven even with all the windows open. The supervisor was Corporal Betty Morrison, a woman in her 30s with dark skin and arms that suggested she'd done hard labor long before joining the military. She explained the work in simple German, patient when they didn't understand, firm but not cruel. "You'll sort uniforms here," Morrison said, pointing to large canvas bins. "Wash cycles take 40 minutes. During that time, you can rest in the shade. I won't have anyone passing out from heat exhaustion. Understood?" Greta nodded, stunned. "Rest periods?" The first contradiction. The food. Dinner that first night was thick beef stew, cornbread with honey, and coffee with real cream. Greta stared at her tray, unable to process it. Back home, her mother was boiling potato peels for soup. Her brother, if he was still alive, was starving in a trench somewhere on the collapsing Eastern Front. And here she was, a prisoner, eating better than she had in 4 years. Across the table, Frau Kessler said what they were all thinking. "This is how they break you, with kindness. Then comes the punishment." The second contradiction. The guards. They weren't brutal. They weren't even particularly interested in the prisoners beyond maintaining order. They joked with each other, complained about the heat, wrote letters home during their breaks. One guard, a young private named Cooper, had a photograph of his baby daughter that he showed to anyone who'd look. "6 months old," he said in careful German to Greta one afternoon at the laundry. "Haven't seen her yet. Born while I was at basic training." He looked so sad and young that Greta didn't know what to say. The third. Contradiction. The camp library. It existed. An actual library with books in German and English, newspapers, even magazines. Greta wandered through it on her first Sunday off, touching spines with trembling fingers. Books about American history, novels, technical manuals, all freely available. In the corner, she found a collection of Life magazines from 1943 and 1944. She sat down and began reading, and what she found shattered something inside her. Advertisements for washing machines and automobiles, articles about factory workers and farmers, photographs of American cities untouched by war, children playing, families shopping, people going about ordinary lives while the world burned. The propaganda had told her America was weak, decadent, on the verge of collapse. But these magazines showed a nation so wealthy, so productive, so normal, that it could fight a global war without its citizens even sacrificing much comfort. That night, lying in her bunk, Greta whispered to Lisa, "What, if everything we were told was a lie?" Lisa's silence was answer enough. The fourth contradiction. The music. On Saturday evenings, the recreation building hosted movie screenings or music. One week it was a jazz band, American soldiers playing instruments with a skill and joy that contradicted everything Greta had been taught about art under democracy. The propaganda had said jazz was degenerate Negro music, evidence of cultural decay. But listening to it, the complexity, the emotion, the sheer technical mastery, Greta understood she'd been lied to about this too. If they'd lied about the music, what else had been a lie? By December, 3 months into her captivity, Greta had stopped waiting for the cruelty to begin. The evidence was overwhelming. The Americans weren't pretending to be kind. This was simply who they were, and that realization was more terrifying than any torture could have been. December 18th, 1944. The mess hall. The moment everything changed. Greta sat with her tray, listening to Frau Kessler's familiar refrain. "They're fattening us for something. This comfort is the trap." And for the first time, Greta couldn't stay silent. What if this is just how they are? The table went quiet. Kessler's fork stopped. 4 other women stared. "What did you say?" Kessler's voice was ice. Greta's heart hammered, but the words kept coming. 3 months, Frau Kessler. 3 months we've been here. No torture, no starvation, no brutality. At what point do we accept that maybe we were lied to? Careful, Hoffman. About what? The truth? Greta gestured around the mess hall. Look around. The guards treat us fairly. The food is real. They follow their own rules even when it benefits us. This isn't a trap. This is just who they are. Kessler stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. You're defending the enemy. Do you understand what that makes you? It makes me someone who can see what's in front of her face. It makes you a traitor. The word echoed across the mess hall. Other conversations stopped. Guards looked over, curious but not intervening. German women at surrounding tables turned to watch. Kessler's voice rose. You've forgotten yourself, Hoffman. Forgotten your duty. Forgotten your fatherland. Greta stood as well, her own voice shaking but steady. The fatherland is ash. The regime is defeated. All I'm doing is acknowledging reality. Reality? Kessler's face was red. Reality is that these people destroyed our cities, killed our men, reduced Germany to rubble. And you sit here eating their food and making excuses for them? I sit here acknowledging that they treat us better than our own government ever did. Gasps from the surrounding tables. Kessler leaned forward, her voice dropping to a lethal whisper. You will regret those words, Hoffman. Mark me. She walked away, her back rigid with fury. 3 women from her table followed immediately. 2 others hesitated, looking between Kessler and Greta, then followed the larger group. Lisa, still seated beside Greta, said quietly, You shouldn't have done that. I couldn't not do it. Greta's hands were shaking. She sat back down, her appetite gone. But at the next table, a younger woman, maybe 20, caught Greta's eye and gave the smallest nod. Agreement or acknowledgement? Greta couldn't tell, but something had shifted in the barracks, and there was no going back. That night, Barracks 7 was divided. Kessler held court at one end of the building, surrounded by 6 women who'd been party members or military officers' wives before the war. They spoke in low, angry tones, occasionally glancing toward Greta's bunk with undisguised hostility. At the other end, Greta sat on her bunk with Lisa and 2 other women, Anna, the nurse, and a quiet farm girl named Erica, who rarely spoke but listened intently to everything. You put a target on yourself, Anna said. She wasn't accusatory, just stating fact. Kessler was a Kreisfrauenschaftsleiterin, a district women's leader for the party. She reported people to the Gestapo back home. She's dangerous. Here? Greta looked around the barracks. What can she do to me here? Make your life hell, Lisa said. Prison hierarchy isn't just about guards and prisoners. It's about who controls the social order inside. Kessler's been building her little power structure since she arrived, and you just challenged it. Good, Greta said, though her voice was less certain than her words. Over the next week, the division became physical. Kessler's faction, the Loyalists, ate together, worked together, spoke only to each other. They treated Greta and anyone who sat with her as if they were invisible. When Greta entered a room, conversation stopped. When she spoke, she was ignored. It should have been childish. It should have been laughable. But in the confined space of the camp, with nowhere to escape and no privacy, the social isolation became suffocating. Worse, Kessler began a whisper campaign. "Hoffman collaborates with the guards," she'd say, loud enough to be overheard. "I've seen her laughing with them, probably selling information about the rest of us. She's forgotten who she is, forgotten her people. When we return to Germany, people will remember who stood firm and who betrayed us." Most of the women in the barracks remained neutral, trying to stay out of the conflict. But neutrality meant avoiding both factions, which meant Greta's circle grew smaller, even as Kessler's grew stronger. Corporal Morrison noticed the tension immediately. She'd been supervising the laundry detail for 8 months, long enough to recognize when prisoner dynamics shifted. The German women who used to chat during work now maintained rigid silence. Certain women refused to work near each other. The atmosphere had gone from wary cooperation to something darker. One afternoon, Morrison found Greta folding sheets alone in the corner while the rest of the detail worked at the other end of the building. "You're being ostracized," Morrison said in her careful German. Greta looked up, startled. She hadn't realized the American supervisor paid that much attention. "It's complicated. Let me guess. You said something positive about America, and now you're being treated like a traitor?" The accuracy shocked Greta. "How did you—" Morrison smiled grimly. "Seen it before. You're not the first prisoner to figure out that propaganda doesn't match reality. And you're not the first to pay a social price for saying so out loud." She sat on the edge of a sorting table, her voice lowering. "The woman leading the isolation campaign, older, gray hair pulled back tight? Frau Kessler. She was asking me yesterday if you'd been given any special privileges, wanted to know if you'd been meeting with camp administration. I told her no, obviously, but she's building a case against you in her mind. You understand that, right?" Greta felt cold, despite the heat of the laundry. "A case for what? We're already prisoners. What more can she do? Here? Make your life miserable, but her real concern is later, when you all go home. She's thinking about how to position herself in whatever Germany emerges from this mess. And that means identifying traitors now, so she can claim she stayed loyal when it matters. I'm not a traitor. I'm just being honest about what I see. I know that. You know that. But in prison, any prison, truth is less important than perception. And right now, she's controlling the perception." Morrison stood to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, Hoffman, you're not wrong about us. We're not perfect. Lord knows America has its own sins. But we try to do right by prisoners. That's not weakness. It's principle." After she left, Greta sat alone among the folded sheets, Morrison's words echoing in her mind. "She's building a case against you." For the first time, Greta felt truly afraid, not of the Americans, but of her own people. In January 1945, Greta received her first letter from Germany. It had taken 3 months to arrive, forwarded through Red Cross channels, censored heavily, but it was from her mother in Hamburg, and seeing that familiar handwriting made Greta's chest ache. Her mother wrote carefully, aware of censors on both sides. "Dearest Greta, we received word through the Red Cross that you are alive and in American captivity. This is a blessing beyond measure. We had feared the worst. Hamburg is difficult. The house is damaged but standing. We live in the cellar now, safer from the raids. Food is scarce. Your father's health has declined. His heart, the doctor says, though doctors are hard to find these days. Your brother Hans has been missing since the fighting near Budapest. We pray daily for his return. I hope you are being treated fairly. The authorities here tell terrible stories about American camps, but I choose to believe that some humanity survives, even in wartime. Stay strong. We will see each other again when this madness ends." Your loving mother Greta read the letter 3 times, then sat on her bunk and wept. Her father dying, her brother missing, her mother eating scraps in a bombed cellar while Greta slept on a real mattress and ate 3 meals a day. The guilt was crushing. That evening, Kessler found her in the recreation building, alone with the letter still clutched in her hand. "Bad news from home?" Kessler's voice was almost gentle. "Almost. Greta wiped her eyes. My brother is missing. My father is sick. They're starving. Of course they are. Germany is on its knees, thanks to them. Kessler gestured toward the window, toward the guards walking the perimeter. And here you sit, well-fed and safe, defending the people who did this to your family. The words hit like a physical blow. I'm not defending what they did to Germany, aren't you? When you say they're kind, that they treat us fairly, that we were lied to, about them, what is that, if not defending them? Greta's voice was barely a whisper. It's just the truth. The truth. Kessler's voice hardened. The truth is that your family suffers while you grow fat on American bread. The truth is that German cities burn while these people sleep safely in their untouched land. The truth is that loyalty means something, Hoffman, and you've forgotten what that word means. Kessler left her there, alone with the letter and the crushing weight of guilt that wouldn't lift. That night, Greta lay awake, staring at the ceiling, torn between two truths that couldn't coexist. The Americans had destroyed Germany, and the Americans were treating her with dignity. Both were true. But how could both be true? The crisis came in late January, during the coldest week Louisiana had seen in years. The barracks had heating, but the ancient stoves struggled against the unusual cold. Women huddled in their bunks, wearing every piece of clothing they owned, their breath visible in the frigid air. Kessler's faction controlled the stove closest to the door, the better one, the one that actually produced heat. Greta's end of the barracks, the smaller group, was left with the temperamental stove that sputtered and died every few hours. On the third night of the cold snap, Erica, the quiet farm girl, got up at 2 a.m. to restart their stove. She was shaking so hard she could barely hold the matches. When it refused to light, she finally walked to Kessler's end of the barracks to ask for help. "Go back to your traitor friends," Kessler said loudly enough to wake half the barracks. "Let them keep you warm." "Please," Erica's voice was small. "I'm just cold." "Then maybe you should have chosen better company." Greta sat up in her bunk, anger finally overriding caution. "This is insane. She's just asking for help with the stove." "She's asking for help from people she betrayed when she chose to sit with you." "She didn't betray anyone. None of us did. We just refuse to pretend reality isn't real." Kessler stood, her face hard in the dim light. "Reality. You want to talk about reality, Hoffman? Let's talk about it." She walked to the center of the barracks, her voice rising. "You sit here, warm and fed, while Germany dies. You laugh with the guards who bombed our cities. You defend the enemy while your own family starves. And you have the audacity to call that honesty? I call it acknowledging truth. There is no truth except loyalty." Kessler's voice was a whip crack. "In the camps, in the cells, under interrogation, the only thing that matters is whether you stay true to your people. And you failed." "The camps?" Greta stood as well, her voice shaking. "You want to talk about the camps? I've been reading the newspapers, Kessler. I know what was found. Bergen-Belsen, Dachau, Auschwitz. Don't talk to me about loyalty to a regime that did that." The barracks went dead silent. Kessler's face went white. "Those are lies. Allied. Propaganda." "They're not lies. There are photographs, testimonies, evidence too overwhelming to deny. Our own government, the one you're so loyal to, committed atrocities that will stain Germany for generations. And you want me to defend that? To pretend the Americans are the monsters? How dare you? How dare you?" Greta's voice broke. "How dare you stand there acting righteous when the regime you served murdered millions? The Americans defeated evil, and you're angry that they're not evil themselves." Kessler moved forward, her hand raised. "That's enough." The barracks door slammed open. Sergeant Rodriguez stood in the entrance, flanked by 2 other guards. "Both of you outside, now." They were separated for the rest of the night, Greta to the admin building, Kessler to the medical ward for observation. No punishment, no solitary confinement, just separation until tempers cooled. In the morning, Corporal Morrison came to walk Greta back to the barracks. You hit a nerve, Morrison said. The camps, the concentration camps. Most Germans don't want to believe they're real. I know. Greta's voice was hollow. But they are real, and I can't unknow it. That's what courage looks like sometimes. Not grand gestures, just the refusal to unknow what you've learned. When Greta returned to the barracks, something had shifted. Kessler's faction was smaller. 3 women had moved their bunks to the neutral middle ground. One, a young woman named Marie, who'd been a teacher before the war, was sitting with Lisa and Anna, talking quietly. Kessler sat on her bunk, isolated for the first time, her face carved from stone. They didn't speak to each other for the next 3 weeks. But the war inside the barracks had reached a stalemate. February 1945 brought news that filtered into the camp through newspapers and radio broadcasts. The war in Europe was ending. The Rhine had been crossed. Soviet forces were closing on Berlin from the east. Germany was dying. In the barracks, the reality of this sank in slowly, like cold water seeping through fabric. For some, it brought despair. For others, strange relief. The war had consumed everything. At least its ending meant the dying would stop. More women quietly shifted away from Kessler's faction. Not dramatically, just small movements, subtle repositionings. A woman sitting one table closer to Greta at meals. Another asking Lisa a question instead of Kessler. The social geography of the barracks was redrawing itself. One evening, Marie, the former teacher, approached Greta in the recreation building. "I need to tell you something," Marie said quietly. She was thin, with dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. "When you said that thing about the camps, I didn't want to believe you. It was easier to think it was propaganda. And now? I've been reading the newspapers, every article, every photograph, and Her voice broke. "My God, what did we do? What did we allow?" Greta had no answer. She'd been asking herself the same question for weeks. "Kessler doesn't want to face it," Marie continued. "If she admits the camps were real, she has to admit that everything she believed was a lie. That's too much for her to bear. So she doubles down, gets angrier, holds tighter to the old certainties. And you? I'm trying to learn to live with knowing I was complicit. Even if I didn't know the full truth, I knew enough. We all knew enough." Marie wiped her eyes. "Thank you for speaking up, even when it cost you. Some of us needed to hear it." She walked away before Greta could respond. In March, Greta received a second letter from home. This one was different, shorter, written in her mother's hand, but with shaking letters that suggested illness or age or simple exhaustion. "Dearest Greta, I write with the heaviest heart. We received confirmation through military channels that your brother Hans was killed in Hungary in December. He died defending a bridge that was lost anyway 3 days later. The news came 1 week after your father passed away. His heart simply gave out. I am alone now. The house is rubble. I live with your Aunt Gertrude in what remains of her apartment. We survive on what the British soldiers give us. They have occupied our district and, surprisingly, treat us fairly. They even brought medicine when Gertrude fell ill. I need you to know something, my daughter. Whatever you did to survive captivity, whatever choices you made, I do not judge you. Survival requires compromises that those who were not there can never understand. If the Americans treated you well, then thank God for small mercies. I have learned that hatred is a luxury I can no longer afford. The war has taken everything else. I will not let it take my capacity for gratitude. Come home when they send you home. We will rebuild something from what remains. Your loving mother Greta read the letter once, then carefully folded it and placed it in her locker. Her father dead, her brother dead, everything lost, and yet her mother's words, I will not let it take my capacity for gratitude. That night, Greta stood by the barracks window, staring out at the Louisiana darkness. Behind her, she could hear the quiet breathing of women sleeping, the creak of bunks, the distant sound of guards changing shifts. She thought about Kessler, still clinging to her certainties, still nursing her hatred like a sacred flame. She thought about Marie and the others who were slowly, painfully, learning to see the world differently. She thought about her mother, alone in the ruins, choosing gratitude over bitterness. And she understood something fundamental. The war would end, the camps would empty, they would all go home eventually. But the real question wasn't about survival. It was about who you chose to become in the aftermath. Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945. The announcement came through the camp radio during dinner. Sergeant Rodriguez read it aloud in German, his voice careful and respectful. "The war in Europe is over. Germany has surrendered unconditionally to Allied forces." The mess hall was silent. Some women we were. They stood in the hot Louisiana afternoon, two German women facing the ruins of everything they'd thought they knew. "I can't forgive myself," Kessler whispered. "I don't know how." "Then start by not lying anymore. Start by seeing what's in front of you, even when it hurts. Start by being better than what we were." Kessler nodded slowly. She didn't apologize for the months of isolation and cruelty. Some things were beyond apology, but she also didn't walk away in anger. It wasn't reconciliation, exactly, but it was a beginning. September 1945, Repatriation Day. Greta stood in line with 127 other German women waiting to board the trucks that would take them to the port. From there, ships to Europe. From there, trains to what remained of Germany. From there, uncertainty. Corporal Morrison came to say goodbye, shaking hands with each woman, wishing them well. When she reached Greta, Morrison smiled. "You did good, Hoffman. Not just surviving, growing. That takes real courage." "I don't feel courageous. I feel terrified of what comes next." "Good. Means you're paying attention." Morrison handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Don't open it until you're on the ship. But I wanted you to have something to remember that truth is worth defending even when it's hard." The trucks rolled out under a gray sky. Greta watched Camp Concordia disappear behind them. The barracks, the fences, the pine trees, the place where she'd learned that the enemy could be human. On the ship, 3 days later, she opened Morrison's package. Inside was a book. The Constitution of the United States, in German translation. And tucked into the pages, a handwritten note. "You were brave enough to question everything you'd been taught. Now be brave enough to build something better from the ruins. The world needs people like you." B. Morrison wept. Others sat frozen, unable to process it. A few, including Kessler, stood and walked out without a word. Greta remained seated, staring at her half-finished meal, feeling nothing and everything at once. It was over. All of it. The regime, the war, the 1,000-year Reich that had lasted 12 years. Over. Repatriation would take months. There were millions of displaced persons to process, borders to navigate, an entire continent to reorganize. The women of Camp Concordia would likely remain in Louisiana until fall at the earliest, but the nature of their captivity had changed. They were no longer prisoners of an enemy nation. They were survivors of a fallen regime, waiting to return to a Germany that would have to reckon with terrible truths. In June, as summer heat settled over the camp like a wet blanket, Kessler finally broke her silence with Greta. It happened in the laundry, of all places. They were the only two on duty during the hottest part of the afternoon, folding sheets in opposite corners of the building, maintaining careful distance. Kessler spoke first, her voice rough as if from disuse. "I received a letter. My husband is dead, killed during the final defense of Berlin, pointlessly, for a regime that was already defeated." Greta stopped folding. "I'm sorry." "Are you? Even though I've treated you terribly? Even though I called you a traitor?" "Yes, I'm sorry. No one should lose family like this." Kessler was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know how to go home, Hoffman. I don't know how to be in a Germany where everything I believed was a lie. How do you do it? How do you just accept that you were wrong?" "I don't accept it easily. It hurts every single day." Greta moved closer. "But I couldn't keep lying to myself. And I couldn't hate people who showed me kindness, even if they were supposed to be my enemies." "You think I'm a coward?" For clinging to the old beliefs. No. I think you're afraid. We're all afraid. The difference is what we do with the fear. Kessler's face worked, emotions warring across it. Finally, she said very quietly, I read about the camps, the real ones, the extermination camps. I couldn't deny it anymore. I know. We did that. Our people, our government. We did that. Kessler's voice broke. And you were right. You were right about all of it. The Americans aren't the monsters. Greta stood at the ship's rail as the American coastline disappeared into the distance. The Atlantic stretched endless and gray toward a Europe she barely recognized. She thought about Kessler, somewhere on this same ship, carrying her own guilt and grief. She thought about Marie and Lisa and Anna, trying to imagine who they might become in the aftermath. She thought about her mother, waiting in the ruins of Hamburg, choosing gratitude over bitterness. And she thought about the hardest lesson of all, that sometimes courage isn't about fighting the enemy across the wire. Sometimes it's about fighting the enemy in your own mind, the comfortable lies, the easy hatreds, the refusal to see what's true. The war was over. The real work was just beginning.